forward, follow me. If I hesitate, push me. If I may kill me, avenge me. If I am a traitor, kill me.
Gangsters, cops, and politicians, get ready to rock. We're on a mission. Each one of us shares our own vision. When I was on the yard, I went real hard. While I patrolled the streets, all the G's on me. When I was on the yard, I went real hard. While I patrolled the streets, all the G's on me.
Hola, gente. It's your host, Gabe Morales. I hope you've been enjoying this series on Nuestra Familia members over the past 6 decades or so. So I got a question here. As I've been going through my pictures, I found quite a few that I didn't even know I had. And I came across this one, which I'm not sure who he is. It's written down, of course, Quesada, but I'm not sure who this guy is. He may have a first name of Richard. Of course, his tattoos tell me that he's from San Jose, West Side to be exact. And he also had a WSM tattoo on his back that I believe stands for West Side Mob. Of course, he has the Welga bird on his chest, and I see a partial J number of 196, which tells me that he was an NR member at the time. If anybody out there recognizes this guy and can fill me in on exactly who this guy is and his status, if possible, I'd appreciate it. There was a Danny, a.k.a. Kiwi, a.k.a. Green Eyes, a.k.a. Chato, Kihan Corpus, who was at a Eastside San Jose. I showed that he was validated as being an NF member in the early 1990s under D number, as in David, 81609, which I show he got due to a robbery beef in 1987. I show he paroled in 1988, but had several violations throughout the late 80s through early 90s. I show he paroled again on that D number in 1997, but then came back to San Quentin in 2004 with a new CDC number of T as in Thomas, 22641. But I show is currently not in custody. There was a George Albert, a.k.a. GQ Quinones, out of Stockton. I've heard quite a few stories about this guy. He was active in the Northern Structure in the 1980s, and I believe was housed at one time at Soledad, under C numbers in Charles, 58411. I show he was released, but then got caught up in that homicide that I spoke about several times now in July in 1990 of a female named Andorra Russo. Evidently, she had seen a previous homicide conducted by the NF, and she was taken out since she was a witness. I then show he was sent to federal prison on BOP number 05449-097. I show that he was housed at Lewisburg in 1992 and was part of a RICO case in 1996. I then believe he was returned back to CDC to do his time for those homicide cases, and I believe ended up flipping on the NF as he appeared on several no-good lists after the year 2003. There was Leroy Quintana, who was an NF associate in the 1970s under A number 67796. I understand he was housed at Old Folsom Prison on July 29th, 1974, when he was killed by MA member Peanut Butter Luis and Rich Rubio. There was an Andrew Demon Ramirez out of Salas. I show that he was a Northern Structure member under V numbers in Victor 81340 and was validated as such in 2010. I understand he had been elevated to NF status by the year 2012 at Corcoran, where he was considered to be a unit commander. I then show that he was released in April of that year, but may have returned to CDC under a BS number in 2022. Maybe some of you guys can also let me know what happened to Andrew Demon Ramirez. There was an Anthony Chato Ramirez out of San Juan. I showed that he was an NF member in the 1980s under C number, as in Charles, 32022. I showed that he was in the California Youth Authority in 1979, but then was popped for a robbery in 1981, where he was given C number, 32022. I understand he paroled in March of 1983, but then was popped for 187 in Modesto in June of 83, whereby I believe he attained NF status. I show that he was at Old Folsom from 1984 to 1986, but had paroled by 1993. And then show that he got popped for a robbery in December 1999, was released on that, but then came back into the system with P numbers in Paul, 64151. I believe then he paroled by 2009 and DO'd because his name appeared on at least one hit list after 2009. There was Art Nestor Smiley Ramirez out of Salinas, but I also show had ties to Watsonville. This guy was very active in the NF via his family. I believe his dad was at least an NF associate before he was brought into the Familia. I showed that he was very active at DVI in the 1970s, as shown in multiple pictures. Understand during the 1980s, he ran dope out of a place called the King's Den and was put on freeze in 1987 due to some of his escapades, but had been cleared approximately a year later. I then show that he was arrested on D number, as in David, 21233, and was housed at Pelican Bay, where his cellie is said to have been Miquel Castillo, aka MC. As the overall governing body had gone through several changes in generals, it is my understanding that Smiley tried to seize power as being the boss of all bosses, similar to what Pablo Sosa had done. This did not go over well with other NF members, such as Pablo Pantera Pina, who himself thought he should be number one. This became known as the D Facility Dilemma, as both fought over power in the early 1990s at Pelican Bay. Understand that Smiley was at San Quentin in 1994 and had been overseeing a counterfeit operation in the late 1990s, but many of the NF brass were complaining that he wasn't kicking back funds to them. One of the main people that complained about this was Cornelio Corny Tristan. Eventually, Smiley and Pantera were deemed no good. Understand he was held at Pelican Bay SHU in the year 2013 and eventually was moved to San Quentin. When I last tracked him by CDC inmate locator system in 2022. To be honest, I hadn't heard much about Smiley in the last year or so, and when I looked him up as of this recording, he shows not in custody, so either was released or is now deceased. If anybody knows, I'd appreciate an update. There was Cesar Lobo Ramirez, who I've spoke about several times. He was the crime partner of Rico Smiley Garcia when the duo decided to take over the Salinas Regiment. I show he was active with the Northern Structure in the early 1990s with H number 36625. I then show that he was housed at Corcoran in the year 1995 and was validated as being Nuestra Raza. He then was moved to Pelican Bay in 1996, but had paroled at the end of that year. It was at that time that he and Smiley started getting busy. They were involved in taking out multiple NF members, in particular those loyal to Hector Copas Gallegos, as well as those loyal to MC Miquel Castillo. I showed that he assisted in the 187 of Salvador Castaneda in March of 1997, who was a Nuestra Raza member who refused to take out his own brother. I then showed that he was involved in the homicide with Smiley of MC in 1998. In March of 1998, Copas Gallegos forces ended up shooting at him. And in fact, there was a hit conducted by one of Copas' soldiers, Chilo Huerta, in October 1998, whereby Lobo almost lost his life, as seen here. I showed then he was housed at Santa Clara County Jail in the year 2000 and was indicted on Operation Black Widow under BOP number 99406-011. But it is my understanding at that time he decided to flip on the NF, including his crime partner Smiley, and he has appeared on multiple hit lists since then. There was David Anthony, aka Big Rock Ramirez, who was an old NF member from the 1970s, who had B number 80012. It is my understanding is related to the Cheyenne Cadenas family. In fact, I was told by one investigator that he attended Cheyenne Cadena's funeral after he was killed in 1972. At that time, Rocky stated that he was still just a young kid. Understand that he was active in the Salinas area in 1976 when he gained that B number, eventually making his way to Pelican Bay and ended up becoming designated as being a captain, and was hit on a RICO case in September 2000. Understand then, at that time, he decided to turn his back on the NF, an organization that he had been with for a good part of his life. I showed that he was housed at New Folsom State Prison in 2012, but was out by the year 2013, and I'm unsure of his current whereabouts. There was Guadalupe Ramirez, who was a crime partner of Richard Calladas, who was involved in the same case that George Quinones, that I spoke of earlier in this episode, was involved in. I show that Lupe was active with the NF in the mid-1970s under B number 51053 and was involved in a homicide in the late 1970s of an AB member named Robert Fuller. I showed that he was indicted on the RICO case in 1982 and dropped out sometime after that. There was a Martin Night Stalker Ramirez, who also went by just Stalker for short. He was out of Salinas East Market and was known as being a Nuestra Familia member in the 1990s under J numbers in John 27861. He wanted to be a rising star in the NF and operated under Rico Smiley Garcia as head of security for the Salinas Regiment, and also worked for Bert Lares. Stalker's main assignment was to gather intel on what was happening in the Salinas area, and his girlfriend at the time was Sophie Rocha, who knew a ton of info on the Nuestra Raza and Nuestra Familia, since she had dated several of them previously, and also conversed with their women, who knew a lot more than most cops gave them credit for. After Stalker was charged in the conspiracy to murder Ray Sanchez and figured out what was really going on, he flipped and took a plea bargain. There was Sammy, a.k.a. Wino, a.k.a. Black Sam Ramirez, who I believe was out of San Ho, possibly Barrio Horseshoe, but also sometimes operated in the Salinas area. I show that he was Nuestra Raza in the 1990s under H number, as in Henry, 76387. I show that he operated with Chuco Guillen as well as Charlie Brown, Campa, and at one time I believe was sold up with Skip Villanueva and acted as his secretary when he was at Pelican Bay, I believe in C4. I showed then that he was selling meth in the year 2007 and that multiple kites were found keistered on him when he was at Salinas Valley State Prison. Understand then that he put a hit out on the West Side mob of San Ho and even greenlighted certain individuals. But I show was out of custody by 2008 and ended up dropping out after that. He even testified against the NF in the year 2012. I'll briefly mention an Andrew Reyes, a.k.a. Menace, who was a member of Norteño Early Mark out of Washington State. As I mentioned a few times now, there are some Northern Structure members that came out of Washington State. Menace got his name for a good reason. He was big and was a menace to society. He was a major drug dealer in the Yakima Valley and I understand was a channel for Pony Mares at one time while he was in the BOP at Pollock, where he served for many years. But I understand that he made some blunders in his decisions, which ended up getting him hit by two Washington State Northern Structure supporters in the BOP. He was released in September 2014 and, far as I know, has been laying low ever since. There was Alfonso III, a.k.a. Papi Reina, out of the Chino Sinners. In fact, I understand that his dad founded the gang back in the 1950s. Understand that he was in the CYA in the late 1970s and then entered the adult system in the early 1980s with C number 7590. Understand then he was involved in the homicide of Tudy T-Bone Lasoya at DVI in January 1981, which was committed with Corny Tristan. I believe he got off on that beef because he paroled in February of 1985. He came back into custody and was housed at CIM in August of 85, but I believe dropped out sometime after that. There was Dioso Coyote Rendon. I understand that he was convicted of attempted 187 in 1976 when he had B number 90389. I then understand he was released on that one, but got popped for a homicide, this time successful, in August of 1983 when he was given C number 89115 and was given life. He was housed at Corcoran in 1988 when it opened and at Pelican Bay in the year 2000, and I believe he left the organization by that time, as he appeared on a no-good list in 2002. Then showed that he was housed at Lancaster in 2012, where many dropouts are housed, and that show is currently not in custody. There was a Ruben Lobo Retana Martinez out of Watson. I show he was affiliated with the NF in the mid-1970s under B number 63749. I understand he was released on that sometime before 1984 and then was down in Mazatlan, Mexico, which, as many of you know, is a major transport area for the Sinaloa cartel, and it is believed that he was involved in narcotics transactions down there. He ended up getting popped and returned to CDC with a C number, either 17751 or 17551. I got too many numbers there, and was ordered killed by Copas Gallegos, and I think may have fled to Puerto Rico. I'm not sure about that. There was a Raul Roy Reveles out of San Juan. I showed he was affiliated with the NF in the 1980s. I showed that he was popped for a burglary in 1987, whereby he was assigned D number 55451. I then showed he paroled in 1988 and had a couple parole violations in 1989 through 91, and then was involved in the homicide of Eli Rosas in 1991, whereby he was assigned NF status. I understand he was finally convicted of that case after a lengthy trial in 1996 and given K number 5361. I showed that he was at Salinas Valley State Prison in 1997 when he was caught with a shank and housed at Soledad in the year 2011. However, shows currently not in custody. I'm going to name off several Reyes members. I think they may have been related. And as some of you know, back in the day, multiple individuals from both the MA and NF came out of Baker's. Anyways, there was an Alfredo Chapo Reyes, who was affiliated with the NF in the 1970s under B number 98041. And I show was involved in the homicide of an AB member in late 1977. I believe that was committed with James Conejo Perez. I show he was validated as being NF in 1979 and was housed at Sierra Conservation Center in the year 2012. And I lost track of him after that. There was a Manuel Sweets Reyes out of Baker's. I show he had C numbers in Charlie 48491. There was also a Mario Jr. Reyes, who I show was a Northern Structure / Texas Syndicate member in the 1980s when he had C number 31115 and was validated as such in 1996. I show that he was released on that C number, but then came back on a D number, 57625. Last show he was at Kern Valley State Prison in the year 2012. Show then he was returned to CDC custody in the year 2002 and has been housed at Kern Valley State Prison for many years now. There was a Richard, aka Richie Boy Reyes, who I show was an NF member in the 1970s with B number 92713. I show that he was found to be on a hit list in the late 1970s, along with individuals such as Chalo Hernandez. And I understand that he was in trouble for stealing Cracker Vindiola's car in Salinas. At that time, Cracker's still operating under the NF before most of the F-14s split to form the Fresno Bulldogs. So I'm sure he wasn't too happy about that movida. Understand that Richie Boy got out, was rearrested, and sent to CDC under F numbers in Frank 75071, and was housed at Albinal State Prison in the year 2012, but I show is currently not in custody. And then we have brothers Ronald and Daniel, aka Woodsy Reyes, out of Baker's. I understand that Ronnie was just a Nuestra Familia associate, but Danny, aka Woodsy, had been an NF member since the 1970s under B number 7531 and was known for talking a lot of masa or a lot of smack about the MA, and for that was hit by Chavo Perez and Chito Padilla at San Quentin in 1971. I showed that he was housed at CTF Soledad in 1975 and then was released to the streets when he was murdered by Mundo Mendoza and Edward Sailor Boy Gonzalez from the Mexican Mafia, both who hailed from the same barrio Nueva Estrada, on the east side of LA. Per Mundo's own admission, this homicide was committed very sloppily, and they made it very brutal to send a message that the MA was somebody not to be messed with.
We were tough guys.
How many people have you murdered?
Personally, about a dozen.
Two of the Mundo we'll talk about were part of a contract he carried out for La M after he left San Quentin. The victims, two rival drug dealers, were unremarkable, but the way Mundo and his partner dispatched them gives you some sense of why the Mexican mafia is so feared.
First, we executed the first one.
How?
We stabbed him multiple times.
With
Scissors. It was pretty sloppy that first time. We tried using a bag. We put a bag over his head to try to suffocate him to death. He wouldn't die.
Then they waited around for the second victim, shooting and stabbing him numerous times. Then they watched him die.
And he was telling us, don't shoot me anymore, I'm dying. And as he said that, his voice kind of faded away, kind of like the Wicked Witch in The Wizard of Oz.
It's an interesting way of putting it.
It's the way I remember it.
Evidently, Mundo and the other Mexican mafia members had remembered when Woodsy had made fun of the death of MA icon Cheyenne Cadena when he was killed at Chino's Palm Hall on December 17, 1972, stabbed multiple times and thrown over the tier. Woodsy evidently had been bragging that Cheyenne pleaded for his life as he was being stabbed, basically saying that he didn't go out like a man. And Mundo states as he was stabbing him, reminding him of this incident, and allegedly told him Cheyenne sends his regards. And so, with that dramatic story, I'm going to have to stop right there. I still have a lot of names to cover under the R last names. But now, this is Gabe Morales signing off for Gangsters, Cops, and Politicians. If I go forward, follow me. If I hesitate, push me. If they, I may kill me, avenge me. If I am a traitor, kill me.
Gangsters, cops, and politicians, get ready to rock. On a mission, each one of us shares our own vision.